Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to The Collision, and we've once again arrived at the scene of another Netflix original movie, Enola Holmes 2, just released. The question is, will it recapture some of the magic of kind of the hit breakout film of 2020, or will the luck run out? I think we'll have to use some deductive reasoning to figure it out. The game's afoot, so let's jump in and talk about it. So Enola Holmes 2. So I actually missed the first when the first one came out in 2020. I think I was on vacation, and so I didn't end up reviewing it, and then just never got around to checking it out. But I knew this one was coming out. I knew a lot of people really enjoyed the first one. And got good reviews, got good buzz. A lot of people watched it on Netflix. So I did go back and I did my binge. I did my research. I watched the first one yesterday and then checked out Enola Holmes 2 today. And so let's jump into this thing. I think there's maybe just to not to bury the lead on this thing, I do think that I enjoy this movie. I know I'm not necessarily the target audience for these types of films. I think they're just kind of aiming more for a bit of a younger audience and maybe more predominantly like female audience. But hey, I'm not really either one of those things. But I did enjoy this movie. So let's kind of get into this this thing. I think there's probably three. If we're going to kind of try and solve the case if this movie worked or not, I think maybe kind of three clues or pieces of evidence that we can kind of look at and kind of piece this thing together. I think the first one is the characters. This is very much kind of sold, other than like the name recognition of like Holmes and Sherlock Holmes and the property. Obviously, that's kind of a bankable thing. But this movie itself, this kind of adaptation, is really sold, I think, on the basis of star power of recognizable actresses and actors, and kind of led by Millie Bobby Brown, who kind of beyond having, I think, arguably this the most like delightfully fun name in all of Hollywood to say, Millie Bobby Brown, is also, she's proven that she has acting chops. She's good. She was good in Stranger Things. I know she's been in other things. And I think Enola Holmes, neither one of these movies necessarily call for her to show a whole lot of like emotional depth or like nuance to her character. That's just not what these sort of movies are. But I do think she is perfectly suited for this role. She is perfectly cast. She carries this. She has enough kind of charisma and kind of to do that sort of more quirky character. She's likable, so I don't think I think she definitely delivers in this. And kind of Henry Cavill as Sherlock himself is back once again, and he's good. One of my, I guess, critiques of the first film is that I found his character interesting, but he just really wasn't in it a whole lot. Like, he just sort of showed up very much on the fringe. He's in this one a little bit more than he was in the first movie. Kind of get a little bit more of his like interaction with Enola and kind of their friendship and some of that kind of stuff. Although I do think he still was mostly left kind of on the fringe, and I think he was one of the more compelling parts in this film, and I wish that they would focus on him more. It seems like they're kind of setting it up if they make a third Enola Holmes, that maybe he'll be more front and center. But as far as this sort of action across the board for this thing, the characters, they're enjoyable, they're charming. So maybe the next kind of clue thing for us to look at to figure out this film is the story. And I think probably the word that would sum this story up, much like the first film, is elementary, my dear Watson. Because this film, again, this is a simplistic story, is never quite as clever as I think it wants to be and maybe like thinks it is. Like the central mystery for this thing really just isn't all that compelling. Like, it's sort of like a murder mystery, and there's sort of several kind of parallel mysteries and plots and things that they're trying to figure out and unravel kind of the truth behind. And I just never got super invested in that. I just didn't find it super kind of gripping to know who was behind who was behind it, and even like the ways that they kind of the moments where they do figure out and kind of start solving the mystery just usually aren't all that exciting. Like, it's not things that you could really figure out on your own watching. Just sort of the way that they figure out the way that Enola kind of uses her reason and stuff and uses the clues. Again, it's fine. This film isn't like boring. It's definitely not boring, but as far as sort of the story, it is very much kind of a simplistic thing. I think really this film isn't really about the plot. The plot and the story mostly just sort of becomes like the background. It sort of gives an excuse for us and like as the viewers to kind of go swashbuckling around kind of Victorian England with these characters. Very very much like character center rather than kind of plot centric. And maybe kind of like the third kind of big piece of evidence before we kind of come up with a verdict on this thing is, I think, the tone and direction. And if the story maybe was like summed up in one word as like elementary, I think I could sum the tone up as earnest. This thing is this. Like there's enough kind of earnest energy all throughout this film, I think, to soften the heart of even like a hardened cynic like myself. This film is fun. It's hard. It's having fun kind of all throughout. It has this sort of real upbeat kind of fast-paced energy that it's hard kind of not to get swept up in kind of in the mood of this film that's having so much fun. And I think it does sort of compensate for the fact that like the story itself, like the bones of the story aren't super interesting, but every kind of like the packaging, everything else going kind of on around that story it's very compelling. The visuals are just super creative. Again, if you've seen the first film, a lot of the same kind of tactics and tricks and stuff that they use, kind of clever animations and transitions and kind of like going more to like 2D sort of sketch drawings and all that stuff, just tons of creative ideas. Usually I'm not a fan of like the breaking the fourth wall. I've never enjoyed that kind of technique. And this film once again does that, where Millie Bobby Brown she'll like turn almost made me feel like I'm watching like Dora the Explorer or something, where it's, do you have any ideas for where should we hide, or where's the clue? So it does a little bit of that, but I think maybe a testament to like the kind of the charming nature of the film is that really didn't bother me like it normally does. And I think like the soundtrack is like super. It's a super fun score, and it's just it is a kind of a refreshingly kind of earnest and hopeful film that did kind of, I think, ultimately that's what won me over to enjoy this film beyond maybe some like the issues like the story or the plot. As far as content, like things to consider kind of on the surface of this thing, there's really not a whole lot for viewers to be concerned about. Profanity, there's really nothing. There's a handful of like British slang words, like they kind of say bloody all the time or sodding. And I think there's one one character kind of yells like "Good God," but other than that, there's no that I heard like any profanities or kind of swear words. Sexuality, there's really not a whole lot in this, except for maybe two kind of moments, which again are left somewhat ambiguous, even though you can maybe read into it more than if you want to. The first one, kind of a trope throughout both these movies, is that Enola is like constantly asking people for their clothes, and she's like changing, and like, that's like how she disguises herself and blends in. So she does that again in this movie, where she asks kind of this like gardener or the servant boy to change clothes, and the camera kind of lingers on the boy after they've kind of swapped outfits, and he's wearing like her dress, and he's kind of pans up on him, and he's like kind of looking at his clothes, and he starts like smiling, and clearly he's enjoying wearing female clothes. And I think there's no question that the film is definitely intentional. It knows what it's doing with that, kind of trying to hint towards that kind of gender fluidity and some of that, although it is a brief kind of, you need to, I don't think a lot of kids would know what's going on with that. Maybe the other one, there's sort of a scene where Enola is at a ball, and it's explained to her that the ladies at the ball are using like their fans to like send these like flirtatious messages to the boys and things that they're too shy or embarrassed to like say out loud. And then it kind of shows right after that, it shows these female characters doing that to some boys. And mostly it's just sort of fanning it or moving it, almost like baseball signals or something. But one of the characters does like fold up her fan and kind of hold it kind of close to her like mouth. And like, you can read into that. In the way it's actually portrayed isn't quite as like central or like alarming as maybe the description of it is. Like it really didn't bother me, but I think maybe someone could read into that a little bit. Violence, not a whole lot of violence. Really, the only kind of like violence, like there's some action, and character dies and some of that, but it's mostly bloodless. The only kind of like bloody violence is Enola finds a girl that has been murdered, and you see like the kitchen knife in her chest, and there's kind of blood around her chest, and then there's like blood kind of coming out of her mouth. And again, it's not like gratuitous, but other than that, no real like bloody violence in this thing. Maybe kind of just a couple of other things that maybe parents or just viewers would want to be aware of. In one scene, Sherlock Holmes, he gets drunk, and he kind of spends the scene very intoxicated. And he's all passed out and talking in slurs and stuff, so there's that. And there's also a gag that I personally found completely harmless, but I think maybe some Christian viewers might see it differently. And that's a moment where there's three female characters and they're kind of standing there. They've been kind of cornered by some bad guys, and like the leader of the bad guy says like, "Oh, it's the Holy Trinity," kind of these like notorious ladies that they've been trying to catch. And they start fighting, and once the females start fighting back, like, the soundtrack starts blaring Hallelujah, and like it's clearly kind of playing on the fact that they were just called the Trinity, and now they're playing this song. And I found it just to be a harmless gag, but maybe some Christians would think that it's blasphemous or something, so be aware of that as well. As far as like things going on like beneath the surface of this, again, I don't think viewers need to look all that deep beneath the surface or have the intellect of Sherlock Holmes to see what the central like messages of this film is. And like the first film, this is very much a film that's kind of about feminism. I can kind of sum the whole film up, the whole message. There's sort of like a pig-headed dude at the end of the film who just sort of yells out. He's surrounded by all these ladies in the factory, and he just yells out, "Why can't anyone control these bloody women?" And that's essentially the premise of this is kind of this society that is oppressive to women, and it's sort of like the question of how these female characters kind of find their place and as a woman in very much like a man's world. I think for the most part, kind of the way it kind of unpacks this feminist message tends to be rather simplistic. It's very much kind of falls into the camp of like, but you're a girl, you can't do that. Like, and again, I think knowing that the target audience is a bit younger, that's fine. That's expected. You don't necessarily expect them to go super deep into like the nuances of some of that. But you do get some of the stereotypical tropes of like really every single male character in this movie is a complete pighead, or he's abusive, with the exception of like her love interest, who's sort of this like progressive political hero, and maybe Sherlock himself, whose character arc is sort of to go from being that to trusting her. So you do get some of those like simplistic kind of broad brushstroke feminism stuff that you see in some of these movies. But kind of despite maybe the handling it in a simplistic way, it does sort of ask some kind of interesting questions of like, how do you go about kind of enacting change? And there's kind of two quotes that I thought was interesting that were juxtaposed together. Where one female character says, "Without power, we women must rely on our wits for our fortune." And then that's kind of contrast with the scene later where a character tells Enola, "All it takes is one small thing to change the rules of the world." And that's kind of the tension all throughout this as far as like the feminism goes, is kind of like, how do you make change? Do you just sort of accept the rules and then kind of do your best to game the system and kind of win the game and find power that way? Or is it worth trying to like stand up and kind of resist and just change the rules entirely? And the film kind of shows different ways of how the female characters taking different responses, and even a twist, which I won't spoil for you here, kind of at the end, that I did think added an interesting wrinkle to sort of that conversation. So I do think it does have some stuff to say that is interesting and I think maybe valuable. Maybe the other kind of real quick, the other kind of theme that stands out is this sort of like being alone and then kind of needing people, as is kind of established in the first Enola Holmes movie, that her name, Enola, is the word alone spelled backwards. And that's some of like the essence of like her story is that she's been abandoned, she's alone, and she kind of needs to find her own way and kind of find self-empowerment kind of on her own, while also, especially in this second film, kind of the understanding that she can't just do it alone. She kind of needs allies, and there is sort of a thread of like self-empowerment, kind of individualism, kind of all throughout this. Her mother says, "Too many people make it their sole purpose in life to fit into the world around them. That's a mistake. It's your path." And kind of that idea that it's about you. It's about kind of becoming who you are supposed to be and embracing who you are. Which kind of runs parallel to the fact that while she's doing that, she also realizes that she's limited, that she can't do it all on her own. She needs to rely on Sherlock and other characters and these other female characters. And I think it's a positive message. I think both those are interesting. They're worth exploring in a film. I do think the way it does that, though, the way it kind of handles the need for like relationships and the need for other people in this film can tend to kind of be seen through a lens of kind of the individualism, like some of the, like one of the quotes where it says like, "Find your allies, work with them, and you will become more of who you are." Or another quote where, "And you could do very well on your own, with others you could be magnificent." And it almost, even though it's a positive message, it's almost presented in somewhat of a selfish way of like people are like this tool that we use to become more of who we are, and they affirm us. And you can definitely see some kind of cultural trends and stuff in there. But I think at the core of that message It is a valuable one. It's a biblical one. If you look at like Proverbs 27 or Hebrews 10, this the idea that like, we sort of find our meaning and our purpose in community and kind of helping strengthen each other. So I think there is some stuff in there to kind of process and think through. So at the end of the day, I think we can close the case and kind of give the verdict that, is Enola Holmes 2 a great, objectively great movie? No, I don't think it is. But is it just a fun adventure that I think kind of succeeds in what it wants to be, and I think will definitely satisfy kind of the audience that it's aiming for? I do. I think this is a fun movie. This thing won me over. It's earnest. I think it has a hopeful tone. It's quick-paced. It's interesting, and for the most part, has some wholesome messages. Nothing concerning in it. So this is a movie. If you have Netflix, if you've seen the first one, or if you haven't, these are movies that I think are worth checking out. They're movies that you don't need to worry about watching like with the whole family, if that's what you want to do. And I think inevitably they're leading to, I'm assuming this is going to be a success. We'll get Enola Holmes 3. But hey, sign me up. I think this is a fun franchise, so I'm on board with that. But hey, if you guys watch this, or if you guys saw the first one, you're curious, anything like that, let's have a conversation about this. Jump in the comment section. Let me know if you enjoyed the movie as much as I did, if you saw some of the same issues that I did, or if you kind of, what you liked about this film, what you like about this kind of growing series. Would love to have that conversation with you guys. And if you haven't done so, I encourage you guys, subscribe to our channel, become a Collider. Got a lot of movies coming up, especially as we move into kind of like the Christmas season, like Avatar, a bunch of stuff coming up. Would love to have you join us and just sort of be a Collider with what we're doing here. Most of all, guys, thanks for watching. Stay safe and continue to collide with your world for Christ.